former minister, and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Fransson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Southern Baptists and Cultural Marxism, with Chadwick Hagan.
Greetings, everyone. This is your host, Wade Fransson, Created in the Image of God. We have an amazing guest lined up for you tonight, Chadwick Hagan. He is a financier and author. He has recently published an article in the Epoch Times on the Southern Baptists' struggle in the face of cultural Marxism. There's a whole host of topics that Chad and I have been discussing in our last couple of conversations, and we'll try to pack a lot of them in tonight. We also have an incredibly special giveaway tonight for our audience members, so be sure to be commenting in the chat and bringing in your friends as well. So let's welcome Chad into the studio. Hey there, Chad.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So where are you checking in from tonight?
I'm just outside Atlanta in Roswell.
Roswell, but it's a different Roswell than the famous Roswell of Area 51 fame.
Yeah, some people don't know that, and that upsets some people, right? I have a British business partner who was excited that he would have a location where Area 51 was, but I had to let him know that's New Mexico, quite different than Roswell, Georgia. So
yeah,
no aliens here.
I like to joke because I'm actually in Brooklyn, township of Oregon in Wisconsin, right? And so you got the east and west coast. I call it the Bermuda Triangle of Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, that's pretty confusing.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, Chad, have you always lived in Atlanta?
Yeah, so my dad's family is from Atlanta, and they've been here for some time. So I was born in Atlanta, and I've lived here my whole life apart from, Boston and London. I've spent some time out in the Northern Rockies as well, but been in Atlanta the whole time.
Well, as our guests know, we like to explore your own origin story. The title of the show, Created in the Image of God. But then our unique circumstances shape us wherever we are planted in this world, both in terms of where we germinated, right? Who our parents are, where they come from, and then that environment in those early few formative years. I have a strong belief that they really shape us and make us who we are. So tell us a little bit about the pre-adolescent, pre-coming of age Chad. Where do your parents come from, and what kind of environment did you grow up in?
Yeah. So my dad's family is from this area, from Atlanta and Florida. My mom's family was from New York City metro area. But like I said, I grew up here, and my father was an entrepreneur. My father is an entrepreneur and philanthropist. My mother was a philanthropist, and she's what they call a master gardener. She's also a naturalist.
What's a master gardener?
Master gardener just means you know a lot about plants and shrubs. Not necessarily like a landscape designer, but actually not at all like a landscape designer, but you would bring a master gardener in if you had a landscape designer to design the type of plants that you might plant in your garden. And my mother focuses on native species. So at my house, we try and use native species. I have some Japanese laurels and other things, but for the most part, I'm putting some azaleas in this new pathway that we had to our front, and they'll be native azaleas. So a lot of plants, especially ornamental plants and landscaping, are non-native species.
Interesting. So we will show an ad here in a little bit for the Royal Falcon Foundation.
Oh, cool.
And it's sponsorship of something that we've originated here called the Hillcrest Orchard Camp Program, Experiential Leadership. And agriculture and companion gardening is a key component of that. We believe, so in the camp program, it's no more than 10% talk, right? And it's 90% experience. And part of that experience is getting your hands in the dirt. And we teach them about companion planting, which is the plant species that naturally help each other, protect each other through the root systems, sometimes attracting predators to themselves to help other plants not suffer from those predators. So there's certain beautiful flower type plants that you can plant, and the Japanese beetles or whatever will go after them instead of the fruit bearing plant that you want to eat.
Mhm.
Things like that. Anyway, so yeah, it's really it's really important to be grounded, right, in reality. And
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
we'll get into that in a number of ways. So was there any sort of cultural how did that cultural mix with your father being perhaps, let's say, a Southern gentleman and your mom being from New York, and then this New York woman living in Atlanta? Was there ever any tension about that? Ever any dissatisfaction among your parents about each one maybe not getting what they wanted, or was it completely harmonious and happy?
Well, I think my mom being from New York Metro, she did live in Chicago and then Los Angeles and then Florida. So by the time she got married, she had somewhat of a Southern identity, but she wasn't necessarily as solely focused on the cultural identity I think that my dad had, being from here, with both sides of the family from here, like kind of only eating Southern food, stuff like that. So it wasn't necessarily friction. It was just, they were just different outlooks. And I'm really fortunate that I had my mother, at least in my opinion, from other parts of the US, and her father was an international businessman. And so that was really influential to me, because Atlanta's a really great place. But obviously, when you're from the deep South and you never really leave the deep South, a lot of times you just
Right.
end up staying in the deep South. And so I do like living in Atlanta, but I spend a lot of time in other places, and also have a base in London. And I really attribute that to my mother's side of the family. My dad also, as an entrepreneur, worked over in London and things of that nature. So he wasn't necessarily completely stuck here, but I think having that New York kind of more like a national perspective on the US was just really influential to me.
So I'm getting a feeling for kind of an enriching childhood in which you were exposed to more things than you might otherwise have been if that union had not taken place.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
so how did that then play out in your coming of age years? What then were, perhaps you can share an anecdote or two that gave you direction in life as you entered your teen years? What would you like to share in a couple of minutes about your coming of age?
I don't know. I played tennis and read a lot of books. I liked the outdoors. So kind of the tail end of high school, I finished it in the Rockies. Was really out in the wild for a while, and really enjoyed that. I'm glad I got that out of my system, because then when I was college age, I wanted to get away from the West, just because I found it to be really remote, and I kind of focused in Boston and London, which are still really influential to me. I don't make it to Boston a lot nowadays, but still I'm in London frequently.
And so then, where did you then go to get your education?
So I went to Harvard, and then I went to London School of Economics and University of London.
And did you start out in economics at Harvard, or was that something that developed?
I wanted to be pre-med, and then I realized I couldn't sidestep organic chemistry. I had an advisor tell me if I was trying to sidestep organic chemistry, maybe I didn't really want to be a doctor. Um, so I just had to come to grips with that. Quite glad I didn't do that, of course.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting field to be in the last few years.
Yeah, that would have been really interesting. And and then obviously, I had the men in my family were entrepreneurs, so I didn't really think about going into business apart from family business, or something that I would create myself. So um, at Harvard, they don't have business for a concentration, so they just have historical types of humanities, and so I focused on economics and ended up really liking economics.
Cool. So, What was it that fascinated you about economics?
So I really like economic history. I like political economy, which is really talked about. It's not really talked about nowadays. But political economy was the precursor to economics. A lot of economics nowadays is like calculus and math and stuff that it's just very, very rooted in academia. I obviously don't have any use for that in what I do in business and everything, but it definitely helped me understand the broader broader construct of business and finance, and that's really, you know, when it comes down to kind of for-profit ventures, that's really what I'm mostly focused in is finance and investment oriented activities. Even if it's business operations and things like that, I approach it from a financial perspective. Some people don't appreciate that. Some people don't like the financialization of stuff, but I find it quite easy to do that and manage multiple businesses and oversee investments. And so very thankful for that.
Yeah, some of my audience may not know that I got an MBA. They know me as the guy with a theology degree who's interested in religion and all these weird topics. But I ended up working for Deloitte and Touche, you know, the big accounting firm in the Deloitte consulting area. And the way that I got there was very interesting because I did not have the requisite degree, but I had succeeded in besting Deloitte with a pursuit. I had been working for this company called CB Richard Ellis. You may know of them. They're the world's largest real estate service provider. And I was doing technology work with them, and I ended up on this consortium of big companies that were looking at the performance of their real estate and how it was managed. And I was there as the technology guy for systems to manage it. And I ended up then beating out Deloitte in this pursuit with Sun Microsystems, and they couldn't believe it, so they hired me. And once Deloitte hired me, then I went and got my MBA. And of course, I had to study economics as part of that. But it's an important component, but it's a very different world. But I've had a fascination for that, how finance works, and you and I talked a little bit about that earlier. But that's really not what we're going to talk about next.
I did take some religion courses.
Awesome.
Just to say that. So for a while, I thought I'd major in religion. Not that I was going to go into religion, but I just found it very interesting, and I made really good grades in it. Right. So in hindsight, just something I could have thought about, religion or history, right? And made straight A's. But anyways.
Well, when we get back after this next break, we're going to dive into the religion part. We'll talk about history too, because there's this intersection in your article, Cultural Marxism and the Southern Baptist Convention and the legacy seeds that were sown in communist revolutions in South America, what the Catholic Church, had done, and the interplay between religion and society. We're going to get into all that after the break. But in terms of economics, you've founded something called the Atlantic Playbook. And
it's a newsletter, kind of digital magazine that I have on Substack.
And you're going to offer a founding membership to one of our audience tonight, which has, a cash value of about $150 for the year. So, I'm not seeing much engagement yet from some of the audience, but hopefully they'll get started once we air the ad for it and come back and dive into your article. So we'll be right back. We've gotten to know Chad a little bit here in this opening segment, and we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of why he's here on the show right after this. Stay tuned.
Unprecedented challenges, one platform stands ready to confront them head-on. Introducing Atlantic Playbook, a beacon of insight in a sea of uncertainty. Founded by Chadwick Hagan, Atlantic Playbook explores the complexities of Western economies and ideologies after years of research and dedication. Join us as we uncover the truth and dissect these challenges, from media distrust to political battles. Subscribe to Atlantic Playbook today and navigate our world with clarity and knowledge.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God. I'm here with Chadwick Hagan, the founder of Atlantic Playbook. We're going to be giving away a founding membership here as the show goes on. So, Chad, the article that you wrote appeared in the Epoch Times. What does the Atlantic Playbook have in common with, and how does it differ from the Epoch Times?
So I'm also a columnist for the Epoch Times. I write a column. I write a few articles a month, usually around business and finance, politics. And recently I've been focusing more so on critiques of, or I guess, anti-Western sentiments of things that are attacking. And an easy way to put it would be things that are attacking, or theories that are attacking the American way of life. And obviously, the way that America is set up in a lot of Western democracies, it's a market-based economy. We're a constitutional republic, but in Western Europe, for instance, those are Western democracies, and they're also market-based economies, without getting too nerdy about the description. On Atlantic Playbook, I cover all of those things, and I write in a non-wonky way kind of about what's important and critique anti-Western sentiment. We're seeing a lot of that here in the US. It's kind of spreading all over Western democracies, and it's fine if it's in Vietnam or China, but I don't really think it has a place here in what we call the West, what we broadly refer to as the West. So my article for the Epoch Times, the recent article, was about cultural Marxism infiltrating the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what attracted you to talk about that specific topic of cultural Marxism in the Southern Baptist Church.
So I grew up Methodist. I've been an Episcopal for under about 20 years, over 20 years. But I grew up Methodist, and I say that because the largest group of religious peoples here in the South is the Baptists, for sure. And the SBC, which is the abbreviation for Southern Baptist Convention, is the largest congregation, I guess you'd say, in the Deep South, and also it's the largest evangelical congregation in America. And it's for, I guess, for most of its history, it's been fairly conservative, if not very conservative. And so I said that little spiel about my background just so I could kind of tee up what I'm about to say, which is, I think when people who are not part of the Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Convention, start speaking out against what's going on inside the SBC, you certainly have a problem. And the problem that's coming about these last few years has been an intensified push to modernize, at least in the view of the individuals who we describe as woke, the SBC. I think that's an attack on freedom of religion, which is a core tenet of American values and what our country was founded on. I think if people want to have their congregations be more woke, they should consider leaving the SBC instead of trying to reform the institution from the inside.
Yeah, so, diversity is healthy, right, in every ecosystem, right? So, part of the issue that you're describing is the effort to drive conformity in the name of diversity, right? Typically it's done in the name of diversity, but it's actually a drive towards conformity. And then they sometimes emphasize diversity on things that are frankly inconsequential, right? The color of one's skin is inconsequential. It shouldn't matter at all. That's not really diversity, right? It's the least of all the distinctions that we might have. And that's actually a quote from the Baha'i writings. I think I'm a Baha'i. I think I shared that. And color is the least of the distinctions, right? But yet it's a focal point, and diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. These things are not valued, and they are targeted in the name of diversity, which I find fascinating to see how that works, and the cognitive dissonance of certain segments of society that can't see how completely incongruous that is. You follow me?
Mhm.
So there have been other church denominations and organizations. I've read about some of them where they've actually been infiltrated by people who had the intent of using these topics to sort of destroy the doctrines of the church. And once these ideas got in and began infecting people under the guise of good religious values, right? And I think in a conversation you and I had, we talked about some of that where, um, people want to be tolerant and forgiving and understanding, and express love and all of those good virtues. And these can then be exploited to introduce uh, changes in doctrines away from the core teachings that they have from Holy Scripture. So is that some of what's going on here with the with Marxism infiltrating the Southern Baptist Convention?
Yeah, to a degree. I guess without because, like I said, I'm not a Baptist. I've obviously, since I've written this article, and before I wrote this article, through one of my podcasts, I've spoken to a number of people in leadership and was able to glean a lot of details. But there was a controversy years back on sexual abuse inside the SBC. And you have a lot of these modernizers and social justice activists who are trying to basically use that as the kind of pivotal point to come in and totally tear down the SBC and change it. Now, sexual abuse obviously is an unfortunate reality that happens in life, but it's happened in so many institutions. You can't really point at one institution and say, we've got to tear that down.
Right.
I mean, inside religion, right? It's happened inside in various sects of Muslims. It's happened in the Catholic Church.
Well, but to be honest and perhaps a little bit blunt, I mean, I could see an issue where you could draw some correlation to the teachings around celibacy, and the fact that might sort of self-select certain kinds of individuals who are struggling with that anyway. But that's not a part of the SBC, right? The SBC, I would assume, I don't know that much about it either, but or don't they believe in pastors and ministers marrying?
Yeah.
Right. And having,
you don't have celibacy requirements.
right. Exactly. So to your point, no, why would you single out that organization? Because to your point, whether it's the Boy Scouts, there have been scandals in all these organizations now.
Right.
Because people are people, and you have people who struggle with these problems and challenges, and who go out and do these things which are horrible and atrocious and have to be dealt with. But why single out a religious organization?
Right, and it's happened. This happens in public schools, right? So
Exactly.
you're not dismantling the public school because of that. You deal with it and move on. But I think that would be kind of the first arrow that was shot. Now, if we zoom out and look at the SBC, it's a predominantly male-driven organization. It's predominantly conservative, obviously very, very influential here in the Deep South. So while there might be some well-meaning activists and operators who want to see modernization in the SBC, you also have a lot of individuals who maybe they do realize, or maybe they don't realize, that they're really caught up in elements of cultural Marxism. They want to force DEI. They want to force kind of, having female priests, which is not something that I am for or against, right? I mean, there's female priests at Methodist churches that I've been to, and there's definitely female priests inside the Episcopal.
Right, but there happen to be doctrines that prevent it in the Southern Baptist Church.
Exactly. Right. And so,
those doctrines are believed by people. I might share here that, again, as a former minister, I would belong to a group, a Christian sect. It wasn't a denomination because we did not accept the Trinity, but a Christian sect, a large one globally, with membership in 120 countries. And the church was split right down the middle over doctrinal issues that were driven and used as a wedge, and ultimately ended up destroying the church that existed. And it was an effort to become more mainstream, to change those unique beliefs and make them conform to the majority beliefs. And it ripped the church apart.
Right.
Which gets to the point of, I want to unpack what cultural Marxism even is. I mean, you're mentioning some aspects of it, which is, the social justice and the woke side of it. But let's define first Marxism. So how would you define Marxism? Let's get to the core of what Marxism is, because it's a word that's thrown around a lot, and I don't think people pause to understand what it means. They're debating it right away. They're like I was in sixth grade when I came back as a kid from Sweden, and I started arguing about capitalism and communism with people who knew even less about it than I did. We didn't
Right.
know what we were talking about. So what is Marxism?
Marxism really is just the religion, and let's go ahead and call it what it is in this day and age. It's religion focused on the writings of Karl Marx, who was a communist and a socialist, and he wanted to see capitalism torn down, replaced by a utopian kind of form of politics.
Well, and the economic theory around it is based on, if you can call it theory, right? Sure, I guess he had a hypothesis, right? If you have a hypothesis, I guess you can have a theory. But his theory was that if you took away ownership and you had some kind of centralized equality making mechanism that forced some kind of equality on people, then that utopia would emerge. But in his theories, didn't he emphasize revolution? Didn't he recognize over the course of his, pondering, that you would need to create enough dissatisfaction so that they, the revolution of the proletariat, they would overthrow the existing status quo, the existing structure, the existing government. And so at its core, Marxism has this seditious revolutionary element embedded in it.
Absolutely, and it's kind of it's this constant fever of revolution and a false promise of liberation. It just goes on and on and on. It's near impossible to stamp out, and that's why guys like myself and you and many others are just writing about it, getting the word out so people can be informed and not be tricked by this. Here in the free market, you can talk about whatever you want to, and because I have that freedom, I have to respect that freedom that other people have, and that's fine. But the issue with Marxism is that we're seeing them tunnel into these other institutions to try and overturn them. This is reminiscent of the Long March from Chairman Mao. This is well known to have occurred in academia and media, and then also, as we've seen recently, different elements of the churches in the Western world.
Yeah, there was this quote earlier, which is why I brought up. And we normally wait on the audience, but there was an interesting quote here. I'm going to just show it, because I was actually reflecting on this, because I know that this person, Shoghi Effendi, who is known as the guardian of the Baha'i faith, he was the great grandson of the founder. He wrote a book called "The Promised Day Has Come." And in it, he warned of 3 false gods. Now, because the Baha'i faith is more recent, it was able to address specifically things that, could only be anticipated in vague, dim prophecies thousands of years ago, right? Prophecies that, are kind of like a movie trailer that is sensationalist, but you don't really know what the movie's about because you don't know who these characters are. You don't know the plot. It's chopped up and mixed up, in terms of the order and sequence to make it really appealing and attractive. But you don't really understand exactly what's going on. But here, communism, nationalism, and racialism, right? And it's racial discontent that is used in cultural Marxism, is it not? It is the fanning of flames of racial discontent, emphasizing racial differences. And in today's world, I see it all the time, using data and statistics filtered through color to identify differences and distinctions that then can be used in the way that I refer to my son often. he has a theme, which is that's not fair. That's not fair. And through his lens, nothing's ever fair, right? Because today my daughter, who's a sophomore, she had the school day off because the juniors were taking their SAT. So she had the day off school. Well, that's not fair, right? Well, no, it is fair, Caleb, because you're going to have that same day off when you're a sophomore, right? But through the lens of, seventh graders are treated unfairly compared to, sophomores, right? So, but you find some statistical difference, and then you filter it through the lens of race, and you fan the flames of racial discontent.
Yeah, I mean, and so I grew up in Atlanta, which is the home of civil rights for the most part, and I've never had a single issue with a person of color here. So to hear about all of this racism, especially Black Lives Matter and things like that, that came about during COVID when George Floyd was killed, it's really surprising stuff, right? And so they have to be able to separate people and kind of, I don't want to say make up these problems, but just for the sake of argument,
the problems are real. The historical injustices have caused disparity, right? There is disparity, and there is difference, and it's not fair, right? But as I tell my kids and at these Hillcrest Orchard camp programs, life is not fair, and that is fair, right? Life is not fair, and that is fair. You can't force equality on everybody.
Well, especially like in a market-based economy. I mean, that would just bottom out the economics.
You must strive and do your utmost to provide equality of opportunity, but you must avoid at all costs trying to dictate, mandate, regulate equality of outcome.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, it is a false god. It is a religion, as you were saying, and I just wanted to highlight that for anyone who's tuning in as a Baha'i, because they, not all Baha'is know about this quote in their own writings. Anyway,
yeah,
so how is the Southern Baptist Convention reacting to this? What are they doing? Are they fighting it? Are they succumbing to it? What's your prediction here? Not to try to make you into a prophet.
Well, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of different people. There's some things going on. It's quite interesting. You have a let's say a more conservative faction that's focused on kind of driving this to completion and making sure nothing happens. And then you have these more liberal outliers who I imagine will be pushed out to a degree, right? If they lead congregations and they kind of run afoul of the SBC's tenets, they usually are excommunicated. It's not the right word, but let's just say it for the sake of the argument. They're usually excommunicated. Rick Warren and his church, I think his name's Rick Warren, Saddleback in California. They were dismissed from the group.
Really? And so what was the premise of Rick Warren being dismissed?
So I ended up taking him out of my article because I didn't really want to attack him too much, even though he loves being, just very, very famous at this point and kind of being a preacher for the presidents and what have you. And that's fine. This is America. You can do that if you'd like.
Right.
His thing was, I believe he had female priests, which the SBC was against. He retired, and then they dismissed his church, or they were removed in some capacity. But that's a great example because I don't think Saddleback suffered by not being part of the SBC. They're able now to do what they want to do. If they want to be more modern, if they want to be more liberal, that's fine. The issue is, why are some of these power players trying to tear down the core tenets of the SBC? What good does that do? I mean, it's just kind of this wave of activism and social justice activists that we have in America. And as I've said, I think it's wrong for them to target the most conservative institutions when we have more than enough resources to join other congregations or to start your own congregation.
Yeah, it does get at that strategy that underlies it, and whether it's conscious or just inherent in the Kool-Aid that's being drunk, it's part of the playbook, right? To create that discontent, to go after existing power structures or perceived power structures, and it's not constructive. there's another sort of rule of thumb that I go by, which is there are forces of integration which seek to weave together the positive elements of things, and then there are the forces of disintegration, right, which seek to tear apart. And disintegration will come, right? You know this in business and economics, right? Um, fail fast and creative disruption and disruptive business models. Disintegration will come as we evolve and grow and move forward. But to be aligned with the forces of disintegration is bad when it comes to institutions and politics and tearing down. We have an interesting situation in America where every 4 years, you can have a shift in power, but when it becomes so contentious that the next administration starts tearing down everything the previous administration built, right? What does that do for the country?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not healthy. That's the cycle we're stuck in right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so good. When we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the broader picture. I'd like to get your views on, in America, we have the so-called separation of church and state. But we also have freedom of religion. And a few months ago, I had a gentleman on who's the co-president of something called the Freedom from Religion Society.
Yeah.
He's actually located.
That's part of what we have in America, right? You have freedom of religion, you have freedom from religion.
Right. Yeah. He's actually right here in Madison, neighboring Madison, where I lived before I moved to Brooklyn to get out of Dane County, although I'm still on the border of Dane County. Dane County being what I like to call the blue heart of the red state of Wisconsin. But anyway, they publish a little advertisement in every issue of Scientific American. And I've been reading Scientific American for 25 years, since I did strategic planning at Countrywide. And on the advice of someone in the strategic planning community, I started reading that and get a lot of input from it. But so I'd like to get your views on that fine line, that razor's edge of the role of religion in society, right? So we talked about in a precursor to this call about how religion needs to influence society. But here we have this cultural Marxism, we have society influencing religion. And some degree, at the cellular level, our cells have this semi-permeable membrane that actually determine what to selectively let in and what to keep out, right? Our boundaries, our walls, our barriers, they're semi-permeable, right? That's healthy biology. But do we have the right equilibrium or balance in this church and state thing here in the United States? I'd like to get your take on that when we come back. Sure. We're getting some good comments. Keep them coming, because there is that founding membership to Chad's Atlantic Playbook that we're going to be giving away. But we're going to go quickly to a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with more of Chad. And don't go anywhere.
And welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Welcome back. We're here with Chad Hagan and discussing his views primed by this article on cultural Marxism and the Southern Baptist Church. So to tee off this next segment, I'd like to actually read a quote from the article. You're quoting William Wolfe or referencing William Wolfe, a former Trump official and Baptist theologian, who highlights organized progressive efforts to infiltrate and undermine conservative denominations such as the SBC. And we talked a little bit about that previously. And I had read other articles about this, and I was kind of, I guess, surprised. I shouldn't have been. Of course they're doing that. Of course they're consciously and seditiously infiltrating organizations in
Right.
order to tear them apart from within. He emphasizes the pivotal role Christianity plays in safeguarding America against cultural Marxism. And I want to emphasize that we are a Judeo-Christian civilization.
Right.
We stand on the shoulders of giants. America wove Judaism and Christianity, as well as Greek ideas and philosophy, as well as, the latest, greatest thinking on the subject of human government and governance, under the idea of what our Pledge of Allegiance has: one nation under God, indivisible. Right. So we got 50 states. The American experiment is not only utterly unique, it is the most wildly successful effort at civilization ever undertaken and accomplished by humankind. For my Baha'i friends in the Baha'i writings, we're called the Great Republic of the West by the founders, right? I've written a book, my third book, which contrasts the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America, one being a godless, atheist, communist enterprise using force and coercion and domination, and the other being a beacon of light that brought people from all over the earth to form a nation with representatives of every people, every nation, every color, every creed. Some of them, sadly, were conquered. Others, sadly, were brought here by slavery, a terrible thing, but something that was common around the whole world at the time. But the result was representatives of every people on earth building together. And for a while, they're jointly forming this melting pot of, my father came here from Sweden, and the first thing he wanted to do was lose his Swedish identity and learn English. He never lost his Swedish accent. He still can't pronounce the SH or the TH. Thankfully, he can pronounce the W, since my name is Wade, and the W doesn't exist in the Swedish language. But anyway, he wanted to become an American, and he had to go through Canada to get here. I was born in Canada. There was an urgent, burning desire to be a part of America. That is all being completely undone. And here you mentioned, you do this quote about the pivotal role Christianity plays in safeguarding America against cultural Marxism. Dude, pray tell, unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I mean, communism used to be, it used to be really frowned upon in America, and that's changed the last 50 years. But if you remember the McCarthy era, which I'm not glorifying, but if you do remember the McCarthy era, I mean, you had a lot of people's careers ruined just from being a part of the Communist Party or studying propaganda and things like that.
Well, that's come full circle, because today people's careers are being ruined because they're not
absolutely
favorable towards socialism. Right.
It's a very interesting time. I had an old family friend a long time ago who I respected really well tell me, he was like, Chad, these are very interesting times. That was over 20 years ago. It has not stopped. It has not ceased.
Great.
We live in very interesting times, to put it lightly. But it used to be that communism was a really bad thing. I'd have to say since the 60s, right, this stuff has slowly come online. A lot of it started around French philosophers, which we all know. I mean, I love France. French philosophers can be some of the most radical. They started pushing these ideas through academia, like postmodernism and stuff like that. And it really took a strong foothold in America. And through academia, it's really grown into something that we all hear about now all the time. And a lot of students in schools are being taught this. I think you could say the brainwash if you want. You can say that they're only being taught the ills of capitalism And then they're looking at historical grievances to kind of continue to underwrite why the ills of capitalism are true. As you mentioned, slavery is a horrible reality that's existed in the past with many countries. I mean, look at the Great Pyramids of Egypt. So we're not going to tear down the pyramids of Egypt. We can't tear down America because of what's happened in the past.
Well, again, to quote from the article, social justice activists relentlessly tear down traditional fabrics in America for their benefit. Right. Okay. So
I think you in America, a lot of times you can just follow the money.
yeah.
And if you're able to tear down something in America, if you're able to kind of take credit for tearing something down, maybe you'll get book deals, maybe you'll go on television, maybe you'll be able to put together some, a different career. Maybe you'll become an activist. Maybe you'll put together an NGO. Who knows? But I think a lot of people, I don't want to necessarily refer to what I wrote and say read it and believe it, but I think that sentence that I wrote, that's a very true reality that's going on right now. People want to be kind of first to market with being whistleblowers in certain things. It's great to be a whistleblower inside Boeing when you have millions of people or tens of thousands of people's lives at risk all the time if the airlines don't have enough quality control. As far as the SBC, it's a different situation.
Well, we just heard that the whistleblower, a primary whistleblower from Boeing, was found dead in his car by apparent suicide, practically on his way to the trial a day or two ago.
Yeah.
And when I was at Deloitte, I actually contemplated being a whistleblower at one point. And I actually called up a few law firms in Los Angeles because of some things that I saw that were I felt a violation of SEC rules. Nobody would touch it. They weren't gonna, at the time, they weren't gonna go up against Deloitte. And of course,
the show Stranger Things, right?
Yes.
In a loose capacity, that revolves around someone blowing the whistle on stuff going on inside nuclear contained zones.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so the idea of blowing whistles on bad actors makes sense, but sometimes it's a matter of national security.
Right. Well,
it's not always a good thing.
This was not, right. This was sheer, Anyway, so I kind of lost my train of thought there, sort of thinking about the whistleblower thing. But let's get back to the role of Christianity, the role of religion in that sense, protecting us from that. And yet part of America's greatness is this idea of freedom of religion, right? Because of the excesses of the past of state churches and religious persecution. But in the absence of strong religious belief, we've had these other ideologies, these other religions take over. They are they are religions partly because they're taken as a matter of faith, and they're not necessarily founded on facts, logic, or certainly not proof and evidence.
Well, we have a lot of new religions that are popping up. I mean, that we've kind of seen them forever in theory, vanity and narcissism, what have you, self. But I think at this point, you've got the religions of technology, you've got the religions of consumerism, you have the religions of neo-Marxism, you have the religions of identity. There's a great saying that says, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in nothing, you believe in anything. And I wholeheartedly believe in that.
Well, I do think that, and this is a hard thing and it's a subtle thing, but the belief in a higher power and the fact that ultimately we're accountable to something other than ourselves, it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's kind of like that same utopian notion that no, why should we? We should be accountable to each other. We should be accountable to goodness. My friend Dan Sanderson, who's was co-host for a while regularly, sometimes he's back here. He likes to emphasize goodness and the Greek philosophers and that altruism that that we all hopefully strive for, right? But there's kind of like the mirror effect, right? Knowing that there's a higher power helps us to take a deeper look in the mirror, helps us to be more open to seeing some of our own hypocrisy. Catching ourselves pointing the finger at somebody and seeing that there are in fact three fingers pointing back, and thinking about that and analyzing that, coming to grips with it.
Well, I
And
think,
so,
a foundational core in recovery for people who are wrapped up in substance abuse is belief in higher power. And that can really be any higher power. But it's the belief in higher power. It's teaching oneself the
Right.
humility and kind of detaching from that false god of self, or
Right.
kind of only being in existence to serve yourself, or being very selfish.
and some
Not,
kind of ultimate accountability. I mean, I really don't like that Christmas thing that's popular in the Midwest about the elf on the shelf, right? Where, they put some little elf doll on the shelf to watch over the kids so that they know they're being watched, to make sure they're good before Christmas. That to me seems a little bit extreme and even creepy. And I guess that's what some people's claim would be about religion. But the idea that our sins, our mistakes, the things we might do in a moment of poor accountability and logic, those things will ultimately be, we will be held accountable for them in some way, whether it's karma or whatever.
no, and as you said, right, these are core foundations of American values. I mean, America loves underdogs, and part of that reason is because of our Judeo-Christian fundamentals. It's,
Yep.
if you're forgiven for your mistakes, you're not completely banished off to an island. You can recover here. You can screw up and still be given another chance. In fact, you can be a bad person and still have some followers and
Right.
go on and live your life, right? So
Yeah.
America is all about that. And
Popular
fortunately enough,
conception
the
is
founding fathers wrote this into our, to our fabric, to the fabric
Yep.
of our culture, that there is freedom of religion. And as you said before the break, there's also freedom from religion, and that's
Right.
that's as much of a right as freedom of religion. So when it gets to cultural Marxists trying to tear down the Southern Baptist Convention, the way I look at that is that is a direct attack on American values, and they just need to go somewhere else. They should stop focusing on the SBC.
Well, and that idea that that anyone with a religious belief, right, has no business in government. It's kind of mind blowing that we've gotten there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
That,
think it
that
was the recent Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney. I forget her name, but she was attacked for being Catholic. I mean, it's ridiculous.
right, right.
I mean, she's most likely intelligent enough to not have her Catholicism obfuscate all her decisions.
Right.
Most likely.
Well, and plus, the popular conception of the Old Testament, the evil, malicious, vicious, jealous God of the Old Testament, when you actually spend time with it, and first of all, realize also um, the the relevance of a time period in history and what was common among humankind at the time, and the people to whom Moses came, right? And prior to Moses, right? The vicious nature of our, great forefathers, right? Which some of that, some of that nature is still even prevalent today. But my point is, if you actually read the laws that Israel was supposed to live under, they're very humane. They're all, times they're almost socialist, right? In the sense that you had to like build a protective railing on the roof of your house so that somebody wouldn't fall off, right? This is, you know, 3,000 years ago that these rules and laws are being put down, right? And that your laws should be equal for the foreigner among you and your own people, that you should not have two sets of laws, right? One for the foreigner and one for yourself. 3,000 years ago, right? These are the laws that were actually written down in the Old Testament, and yet the popular conception is that it's somehow this evil, antiquated, horrible, obsolete religion. Um, you know, but those ideas and those thoughts are infectious, right? We like to think of ourselves as so far advanced, we perhaps like to look down and judge those who are not living by our, woke standards, to use that word.
I often make the joke about artificial intelligence and say, be careful. We might create a god and people start worshiping it. And when I say that, I'm sure other people say that too, but when I say that, really what I'm trying to poke fun at is this anti-religion in America is a religion in itself.
Absolutely.
And Marxism, the main reason it's so hard to stamp out is that because it's a religion as well. When you're 20 years old, you're reading this in college, it sounds like a great idea. You don't have a lot of life experience. Of course, you're like, I'm a Marxist.
Well, and you've been indoctrinated into it, and people that you know and love and respect in the educational institutions, they've taught it from the mountaintop. They brought down the stone tablets and said this is the way it is, and you've bought into it, and you haven't actually proven it. You haven't tested it. In fact, it can't be proven. It can't be tested. Excuse me, I shouldn't say that. The tests and the evidence in the human petri dishes of Cambodia, right, of Maoist China, of Stalinist Russia, there's your proof and there's your evidence, right, about how it doesn't work and it can't work. But they've obviously already been indoctrinated in the denial of all that evidence, the denial of all that reality, the denial of all that proof.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like they've been inoculated against it. They can't get rid of the disease. It's become chronic, and their immune system is so compromised it can't even recognize the bad viral idea.
Or it's what we're seeing with the pro-Palestinians, right? A lot of those people are wrapped up in being anti-colonialism, anti-settler colonialism, which for the most part was done by white Europeans, and because of that, they're now anti-Semitic. So, I mean, how do we get there?
Right. Well, we talked about Harvard, and you had shared your perspective.
Israel was settled by white Europeans and not Jews, even though they were Jews from Europe. And so they've misconstrued that, and they say, well, the Jews are really white Europeans. Never mind the fact that this has been a historical land for Jews for thousands of years.
Well, you mentioned your sort of surprise that the situation at Harvard had so quickly become so anti-Semitic when you and I believe your father also went there, and you had said it wasn't that way when you were there.
So Bill Ackman said it best recently, is that he's a very famous tycoon, hedge fund tycoon. His daughter was at Harvard, I guess around 2020. And I guess she's since graduated. She did not see the anti-Semitism then. So this is a new reality. Harvard's always been very Jewish. In fact, I know the Harvard Law School, I used to hear from some friends who were looking at law schools to go to. They didn't want to go to Harvard Law School because it was too Jewish.
Well, there you have it actually then, because that infiltration, if an institution is viewed as Jewish, right? Well, you have the perfect antidote to that in this intersectionality in which they are somehow now the oppressors. And so you can now infiltrate it, and you can implode it from within based on that premise. So its strength becomes a weakness.
But the real hatred is directed at descendants of white Europeans, which.
Well, let me share an anecdote here. I think I might have told you this. When I resigned from the ministry, I first went into teaching. I taught 4th and 5th grade out in California in 96 and 97, I believe it was. Might have been 97, 98. And the 4th grade social studies curriculum that I had to teach was chapter after chapter after chapter of how white men oppressed every imaginable other identity. It started with the fact that, we were at war with South America, in those early years. We were, of course, the Native Americans, and then we exploited the Chinese to build our railroads, and then women didn't have the vote. There was, of course, slavery that then came in. And then the chapter on World War II focused exclusively on how Americans had concentration camps in which they placed the Japanese. So the whole narrative around World War II is completely distorted with this ongoing narrative about how basically white men are evil. They have oppressed and exploited every other kind of identity. And this was being taught to fourth graders who were, of course, accepting it all uncritically. And this was in 1998. So those kids were 10 years old. And that's now, 26 years ago. 36 years? How time flies. 30 years. It was 30 years ago. So they're 40 now, and they've had kids that have gone through the same system. So you have multiple generations who are being taught this in fourth grade. Now, when I was in fourth grade, I was in Sweden, which at the time was the humanitarian superpower. I'm very proud of it, too, the humanitarian superpower. But in fourth grade in Sweden, I can tell you that what we studied was not how horrible the Swedes were, but rather how glorious Sweden had been and how they had conquered all of Europe and been all the way down to Lake Constance and the border of Switzerland and taken over half of Poland. And there was a certain national pride that in all that warring that went on, Sweden had held its own and even been victorious for a while. Right now, today we know war is horrible and we don't want any of it. Right. But back in the day, they taught their kids still that they were able to hold their own against the onslaughts of people who had sometimes, were the oppressors trying to attack Sweden, and sometimes Sweden was the oppressor attacking other people when they got.
One thing I will say on war, right, and I'm not a military historian, but we're selective on who we want the war to be against, right? Obviously, if there was a war against white Europeans, there'd be a lot of people accepting of that right now.
Right.
If you look at the Syrian civil war with the amount of civilians who were killed, it's in the hundreds of thousands. The war went on for 10 years. We heard very little about that.
Right.
If you look at what's going on with Israel and Palestine, we obviously know where that is right now. But if you also look at the amount of civilians killed in Ukraine, there's so many people who are bloodthirsty for the war to continue in the Ukraine. Never hear about the civilians who were killed by Ukraine. So
well, people realize that
caveat, because it is a selective situation.
People don't realize that the most atrocious war in American history, 50,000, was it 500,000? I forget now. Some outrageous number was the Civil War. Right. The Civil War, which was largely fought to abolish slavery, was the most devastating war America has ever been involved in by far. So we're going to cut to one last break real quick, and then we're going to come back and look at a couple of comments and give away that founding membership. We're going just a couple of minutes late, but I've got to play this one last ad, and then we'll be right back.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Visit our website and embrace a world of possibilities today. RoyalFalconFoundation.com.
Welcome back to the Creating the Image of God show. I'm here with Chad Hagan, who is backstage for a moment, taking a quick break. And we're going to start looking at some of the comments, and he'll be back hopefully in a minute to decide who the worthy recipient is. First of all, thank you for the comments that have been coming in. And there's Chad back with us now. Welcome back, Chad.
Sorry about that.
No, it's quite all right. So we just rolled with it. So a number of great comments here. We talked about the early ones, from I'm going to get the name wrong here, Exnard Prime, about the false gods of communism, nationalism, and racialism. It's interesting to think about how they work together or fit together. There were also here from, and I've got to put my glasses on here. Is that an O or an A? I always get his name wrong. He's a frequent contributor, Lord Cole. Cole means cabbage, though, in German, so I'm not sure
Lord
Or Lord,
Cabbage.
right? But quoting, of course, one of my favorite psalms, "How good it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." This psalm is also interesting because it goes on to say how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And then it says, it's like the precious ointment that was poured on Aaron's head and dripped down his beard and covered his garments. It's like it's interesting sometimes how the Hebrew scriptures use their analogies and metaphors. That's I guess a pleasant image, for the Jewish people. Um, so we also have, let's see here. And I don't know, can you see the comments,
I
Chad?
can. There's a recent one that says, can I read a comment? Do you mind?
Absolutely. I can go ahead and pull it out for you too.
It's from M. Sterling 1. It says, isn't it important to talk about some of the unsavory parts of American history instead of sugarcoating and whitewashing? Yes, but my argument would be is that we've talked about it enough. We've talked about it to the point that there's actually hatred against a lot of the foundational values in America. And I don't believe there is this huge factoid of white supremacy continuing in America. I don't think we have some KKK that has any power. I know they tried to say January 6th. I'm not trying to get political. I know they were saying that January 6th was a Christian nationalist. I just think that we need to focus on what can bring us together versus trying to continue to divide us.
Absolutely. I'd like to share an example here. Many of us perhaps saw that movie Hidden Figures, right? Celebrating the African American women who were brought into the space program. And movies like that do not pull any punches about the racism that those women experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There are some really ugly scenes in that movie, but the movie celebrates their contribution.
Right.
And celebrates that despite the racism, they were given a chance to participate in the greatest endeavor in human history. Again, in my book, I talk about the space race between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America, and I make a parallel to the Tower of Babel, in which they were all one. They had one language, one purpose, and they were trying to build a tower to heaven. And God said no and confused their languages, scattering them about the earth. And I've said that's like the potsherd being broken, and the pieces being scattered around the planet. Well, in this modern day and age, it's my belief that those people were brought back together, and the diverse contributions that they were able to make voluntarily under the United States system is what allowed us to build the tower to heaven. The first verses of Genesis say that the greater and lesser lights are placed in heaven to rule the night and the day. And the fact that we were able to put a man on the moon, although that's disputed as well, but the fact that we were able to put a man on the moon.
Actually, listened to a podcast that refutes that the other day. It was the first time I'd ever listened to that. And I have a friend that, not to go off on a tangent, I've had a friend who used to tell me this like 20 years ago. And I called him up and I was like, you've always said that the moon landing was fake. I've always said really mean things to you because you said that. Because I grew up during summers in Naville where I would see the space launches, right? So it just never occurred to me that this was fake, or some people thought it was fake. But
right.
Yeah, I just had to say that because yes, that is refuted by some people.
Exactly. But in my opinion, literally, the governor was taken off humankind, and the American nation, that great republic of the West, was destined to bring peoples of all nations and creeds and colors and perspectives together to work together to build the tower.
Velcro was created then, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, that's just, I guess, I don't know when Velcro was created.
What would we do without it?
During that space race, right? And so
Right.
without a doubt, it's incredibly influential to a lot of people.
So, but
And it doesn't matter
movie,
their background, it doesn't matter their sexual orientation, it doesn't matter their religion. All of these, different types of humanity, they're all really inspired by space race and humanity coming together. And that's why it's so important for us to focus on,
exactly,
being strong as a nation versus dividing ourselves.
But that movie, when you watch a movie like that, and there are many of them like that, your heart goes out. You begin to feel empathy for the people who have suffered under racism and bigotry and disadvantage, as all
Mhm.
peoples have throughout history. All peoples
Right.
have suffered this throughout history. I mean, go read, Little House on the Prairie to understand what it was like for those early American settlers, right?
Or,
Um,
Italians in, I mean, in the early 19th century, I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of racism
right,
throughout.
exactly. I mean, remember the Polish jokes we used to tell in high school?
Yeah, I
There's
mean, for sure. That was like off the hinges, nonstop Polish
your,
jokes. I mean,
your
we're
microaggressions, right? And you weren't telling racial jokes, you were telling Polish jokes, right? Nobody was telling racial jokes because those were even then not, even in my childhood, that was not accepted. Now, it might have been different in some parts of the South in Atlanta. I'm sure, you know, we evolve slightly differently, as we advance and change. There were, whatever. But the point is, you can be positive about our common destiny, our common potential, and what we have in common, and how we are all working together to solve these problems. And in that context, a movie like that brings out the brutal ugliness as well, provides that balance between, yes, you're absolutely right. It is important to talk about some of the unsavory parts of American history. But to your
yeah,
point,
it is.
Chadwick, I think today it's like constant 24/7. And again,
Exactly. And it's a
you know,
little one-sided sometimes, right?
well,
So,
not only that. So first of all, we have Swedish background, right? So guess what? We had no part ever in African American slavery or in black slavery. I mean, the Vikings might have enslaved some other people, but it wasn't people from Africa. Okay. But despite that, my son, who is whiter than white, I mean, he's whiter than I am. When he was a baby, we couldn't hardly take pictures because the camera wouldn't white balance. His hair was so white and his skin is so white. He's actually got patches where he's very personal, but part of his skin is actually almost albino, right? He's whiter than white. And yet he is told in school that, he is a racist. And he's told by some in our faith community that he is a racist by virtue of being white.
yeah.
And that it's in his DNA because because his forefathers, had slavery. Well, how so that leaps over from other white people because it's not in our background. Nobody in our background had anything to do with it because we come from Sweden, which didn't have it. So this is the kind of racism that is happening in reverse. And so you can't just keep emphasizing those injustices of the past. That is not the way forward,
Yeah, I totally agree.
especially when they weren't even perpetrated by, this generation or the previous generation, or in some cases the one before that and the one before that. So anyway, that's what I would say, Angela. But I mean, A.M. Sterling. But thank you for making that comment. I think it's important to raise it up.
Mhm.
Other thoughts or comments? I thought this was also interesting, by Steve Eaton. Self-oriented people recoil at any law or whatever they see as curtailing their autonomy. So, of course, the Old Testament is anathema to some modern people. So, how do you stand on that? Are you more of a libertarian or even an anarchist, or are you more? What is the role of regulation in society? I mean, you and I actually talked about free markets in the sense that without some regulation, you don't have a market at all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the American system is a pretty good system.
A lot of checks and balances.
A lot of checks and balances. I don't think we need more regulation.
Yeah.
I do. I'm part of a group called Fair Tax, which we're trying to I'm on the board. We're trying to focus, or we're trying to move towards a consumption tax instead of an individual income tax. Maybe focus on taxing corporations more or at all. But no, I mean, I believe that we have the regulation that we have in place. Less regulation is usually better. I don't like a lot of government, but I wouldn't fall into the category of an anarchist at all, and I don't really fall into the category of a libertarian anymore. I'm probably more along the lines of a moderate conservative nowadays. I used to always be a centrist. I don't really think centrist works too well in America right now.
Yeah, when they keep moving the ditch closer to you or further away, it's hard to be a centrist. Anyway, we're kind of going late. There's so many things I could continue to talk about, but I want to be conscious also you're an hour ahead. So any of these comments jumping out at you as the person you'd like to grant that membership to?
Do I grant or do you choose? I mean, there's a number of good comments. It's
you get to choose.
I mean, Lord Cole seems pretty great.
Well, you know what? He has won a couple of books in the past that he graciously said, don't bother sending them to me because I'm in Canada.
Oh, wow.
So he, but I'm assuming that it doesn't matter that he's in Canada for
No,
your
just
purposes.
email, right? It's an email.
Well, there you go. So Lord Cole,
Globally.
congratulations. But see, you're in Canada, but that's a good thing today. So, exactly. No, you are the winner today, Lord Cole. And so send an email to, and by the way, we did tell him, look, I think he won 2 books. We said, well, now that you've won 2, we'll ship both of them to him. And he said, no, send them to somebody else. So here's the email for you to email and get to us, and we'll make sure you get that. So any parting words, Chad, to our audience and for posterity on all these topics we've been talking about today?
No, I mean, I appreciate you having me on, and I've enjoyed reading all the comments. A lot of engagement here, so it's been really great.
Awesome. Well, all that remains then is to quickly let everybody know who we're going to have next week. So next week, we are having a returning guest. This is Imam Makai Abdus Salam, who is going to be covering Quran for Beginners, Part 2. Last time we were here, he is the founder of the Interfaith Library. And we talked some very interesting comments about Isaac and Ishmael and the heritage and the fact that Abraham was to be the father of many nations. And those nations are extant today. And I think you're going to really enjoy the discussion that we had. We had a lot of great engagement last time. So please join us next week, same place, same time, for Imam Makai Abdus Salam. We're also going to get into the topic with him of whether or not there should be a priesthood at all. And what happened at when Jesus died on the cross and the veil in the temple was rent asunder, providing access to something that previously only the high priest had access to. So we're gonna get his take on that. So you don't want to miss that. Chad, it's been a pleasure. I hope we can have you back. Maybe dive into a little bit some of your economics background and the idea of cyclical disruptions in the marketplace and what might be done there from an economist perspective. We didn't even dive into it all. You said earlier on in the show, and this really intrigued me, that originally economists didn't study all that quantum math, but they looked at something, you called it something like political economy, or what was the term you used?
Just, I mean, at this point, it's become very entrenched in math.
Right. But you said when you initially started studying at Harvard,
whatsoever, there's used to be something called political economy.
Political economy, right?
Which focus on a number of different things. David Ricardo is a good guy to read. He's probably, I mean, at this point, they're considered classical economists, right? So Adam Smith, David Ricardo, but a lot of that's the foundation of free markets and what we're dealing with now. When you get into Keynesian economics and a lot of other things, it starts kind of going off the charts with different types of maths.
Yeah, awesome. Well, there you have it. Thank you again for being with us. We hope to have you back sometime in the future. And thank you for sharing so much thought-provoking material today.
Thanks, Wade. Appreciate it. Great to talk.
All right. See you all next week.